Hello, good afternoon. My name is Alana Weiss, and today it is my pleasure to welcome Robert Stephen Kaplan to the Leading at Google series. Rob is a professor of management practice at the Harvard Business School, and prior to joining HBS, he served as the vice chairman of the Goldman Sachs Group with oversight responsibility for the investment banking and investment management divisions. Rob is also currently Google's chairman of the Investment Advisory Committee. Please join me in welcoming Rob.
Thank you. Thanks, Alana, and thanks for having me here. All right, so just out of curiosity, given you're here on your lunch break, how many of you feel stressed out? Stressed out, losing sleep at night? Really? Worry? Well, that's not good. I'm sorry to hear that. What are you worried? Just throw out a few things. What are you worried about? Those who raised their hand, what are you so worried about? All right, so you're juggling too many things, okay, which is what we were talking about before. Others, any others? Yeah. What's that? Insurance settlement, okay. All right. What else? How many of you manage a project or a project team or people? How many of you would like to manage a project team, or people? All right. Okay. Here's what I'm going to do, not to spoil your lunch. First of all, here's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to go through just 6 or 7 slides. I'm going to try actually not to talk for more than 30, 35 minutes, and then we're going to leave the rest of the time for questions, things you want to talk about. And the reason I'm doing this is this is actually a version of a talk I've been giving for the last 25 years, for better or worse, because I learned a long time ago in leading businesses, leading nonprofits, working with organizations, I realized I was never going to ultimately figure out all the answers. And as the world gets more complex and you're in a very complicated business, as a leader, no matter how smart you are, experienced you are, you're never going to have all the answers. You're never going to understand well enough to be telling people what they ought to be doing in a lot of cases. And what you don't want to do is be ordering people to do things and be wrong. And so what I've learned over the years is the most important thing a leader can do is learn to ask the right questions, be open to learning. There are times to give orders and advocate and say, this is what we're going to do. But a lot of the stronger leaders know when to do that and also know when to ask questions. And so what I'm going to do here is go through, this whole book is about how to ask those questions. And it's basically about, if you want to run an organization, you want to be a leader, you want to be a project manager, you want to manage your life, here's a roadmap for doing it. And it's in the form of questions with stories about how to do it, okay? So that's what I'm going to talk about. And it's going to be, you may think Harvard Business School is a very sophisticated place. You're going to be sorely disappointed. You're going to basically see, or at least with me, maybe not with them, but you're going to see that the basic questions you need to ask, I think, to be an outstanding leader are brutally simple. And I mean really simple. That does not mean they're easy to do. They're not easy to do. All right. And by the way, where did these pictures come from? I literally went on Google, and for every title, I picked a picture that resonated with me, and boom, put it in there. So there's no, if you don't like them, you can't blame the graphics firm. All right, here's the first point. This is true for everybody, and most of us, including me, don't think about this. As a leader, the first thing I would argue you need to think about, and for each of you, what is your aspiration? What is your vision? What is it you want to accomplish? Now, let me just ask you, how many here in this room have a vision for themselves, for their business, for the project they're working on? Okay, that's great. A lot of people don't think about what their vision is. And let me just say to you, there's 2 things I talk to leaders about. Number 1, can you write down on a piece of paper your aspiration? So all of you raised your hand. I'm not going to call on you, don't worry. But can you write it down clearly? Okay? Number two, can your people, the people that you're working with, can they write it down? If I gave them a quiz, could they write down the same vision that you just wrote down? Here's why this is important. First of all, I would argue that every successful business I've ever seen or nonprofit, a lot of people think that successful businesses are because people are so shrewd, that they're focused on how to make money, they're commercially smart. Not really. They ultimately need to do those things, but those come way down the list. Successful, sustainable businesses that I've seen start with a vision about how to serve a client or make a positive impact on the world. And they're based on a clear, distinctive competence. Now, I don't need to tell you this because at Google, you know this already. You focus on this every day, but a lot of business leaders don't. And the key to a successful project leader or leader at all is to stay with that vision or update it if you need to update it. But everything you do needs to revolve around that, and the people you're working with need to know what it is, because it's very hard to mobilize people if they don't know your aspiration. So to me, the first thing as a leader you've got to do is, can you write it down clearly? Do you articulate it to the people you're working with? You may not have people reporting to you. The people working on your team, the people across departments, do you tell them what the vision is so you're on the same page, and could they repeat it back? Now, I would argue, I'll take an example. Barack Obama was elected president of the United States, in my opinion, in 2008, because he articulated a very clear vision for where he wanted to take the country. And to me, that vision was not change, that was the mechanic. It was unification. We're going to find a new way to do things. We're all going to come together. Some of you were too young, but you remember the speech he gave at the 2004 convention? There's not a black America, not a white America, not a rich America, there's just the United States of America. Visionary candidate. Very clear on what he wanted to do. Very clear aspiration. You should ask yourself, people ask, gee, a lot of people accuse Obama today of not being a strong leader. Why? And it takes a little thought, but for me, I think people are not clear on what his vision is for lots of reasons. But it shows you how important it is if you're a project leader, if you're the head of a household, or if you're the president of the United States. It starts with a clear vision. Okay? So that's number one. By the way, these are questions. So reason I write these questions, if you're struggling or you can't seem to mobilize your people or your unit isn't doing well and you're wondering why, what this is intended to be is keep 5 or 6 questions on your wall. Maybe I'm not clear enough on the vision. Maybe the world has changed and I haven't changed the vision. Maybe I have a vision, I'm not repeating it enough and my people aren't clear. Maybe I better repeat it more in the next meeting, and that's the problem. So this is almost like a pilot on a plane, checklist on what might be wrong when they're having engine trouble. This is number one question. This is the cornerstone for me of everything you do. I teach at Harvard Business School. I want to be the best professor in the world. Okay, I do. It's pathetic, but I do. That is my dream. It really is. And everything I do is to try to, we'll see if I get there, but that doesn't matter. At least I know what I'm trying to do, and it has a powerful impact on everything that I do. Okay, now, once you have a vision, there's one other thing that's got to go with it, and that is you have to pick 3, in my opinion, 3 to 5 key tasks. I call them priorities here, but what I really mean, what are the most important things you must do superbly well to achieve that vision? And same question, can you write them down? How many of you think you could write down the top 3? Okay, interesting, not as many. So you're clear on the vision, but it's not as clear on the priorities. And I would argue you've got to be clear on the priorities for one big reason, which I'm about to get to. How do you spend your time? How many of you are working 70 hours a week, stressed out because you're working 70 hours a week? No? 60? All the ones that are, okay, 60, fine, 50, whatever. But you're juggling a lot. Here's the point. When people are struggling on how to spend their time, or I have a business leader or anyone come to me and say, oh my God, I'm just juggling so many things, I don't know what to do. How do you do it? I can't squeeze these things in. And by the way, I'll say to them, well, what's your vision for the business? He said, oh, Rob, I wish I had time to think about it. I'm just too busy. Okay, well, can you tell me your 3 to 5 top priorities? I mean, oh, Rob, I mean, the chaos of this business, I can't even think about it. And I go, oy, you know, I say to them, listen, this is part of your problem. Clear vision, and then you've got to write down 3 to 5 priorities. Now, some of you may say, Rob, you couldn't understand, we've got 10 or 15 priorities. And I've had people say that to me. And I would say politely back, 10 to 15 priorities is the same as 0. 0. That's 0. Okay, and why do I say that? It's not that I don't have a to-do list of 10 or 15 things, but a human being, no matter how talented, at any one point, it's hard to really bore in on 3 or 4 or 5. And it's critical. The most important asset you have is your time. A lot of people think it's money, it's hard assets, it's all this other stuff. I believe strongly the most important asset all of you have as leaders is your time. Yet many of us spend our time in a very sloppy way. And one little rule I give for people, pretend that this time was a big sum of money. Like whatever's a lot of money to you. Pretend that you were going to think about how to spend it. I will bet you, just looking at this group, you don't just, oh, here to spend X thousand here, X thousand there. Who does that? Nobody does it. You really think, some of you really think hard before you spend any of it. I would argue the irony is if you do that with your money, this is more valuable, I would argue, even than your money. Or it's the same thing. Why don't you do it the same way? And there's only one way I know how. You've got to decide in advance what your top priorities are, and then you've got to match your time with those priorities. When I see a business leader or a nonprofit leader or a project manager, you name it, who's having trouble, invariably, lack of a clear vision, or they've got it, but do not think about matching their time with their top priorities. Why? A, they just don't think about it. B, they haven't written down their top 3 to 5 priorities. But I can tell you, if you don't know your top 3 to 5 priorities, I am pretty certain you are poorly using your time. Because it takes enormous effort. If people are asking you to do things all the time, like they were with me, they still are, unless you know what you're trying to do, you've got to know who to say no to. You've got to learn to say no. The question is, who do you say no to? Unless you've decided in advance. It's hard to say no to people. How many of you actually, well, I won't even ask, but I got an idea. If you asked me how I spent my time this last week, I would not have the slightest idea. How many of you think you know? And how many of you don't know? All right, and how many of you got like a shoulder problem or something? All right, so okay, we'll leave you alone on that. You're eating lunch. But let me tell you something. The other advice I'd give you, if you're like me, go for a week and track how you spend your time. It's annoying to do, but do it anyhow. Track within chunks how you spend your time, and then write it down at the end of the week. Match those chunks with those top priorities, and see how far off you are. Now, the one other thing, if it helps, and I talk about this in the book, and this is simple stuff. One thing I've done for CEOs of large organizations all the way to, just independent project managers is ask them to break their tasks, the things they're spending time on, into 1s, 2s, and 3s. 1s are things you've got to do. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. For example, I believe you've got to decide on your vision and priorities. If you're not making time for that, you've got to do that. That's a 1. Then there's 2s and 3s. 2s are things, maybe, maybe not. And 3s are things you absolutely should not be doing. I've talked to CEOs who are still approving expenses down to blank $1,000. And why? Well, it's just what we've always done. How many hours a week does it take? 15. And yet they don't have time to do the very basic things you need them to do. So I just say to you, track it for a week, break it into 1, 2s, and 3s, match it with your priorities, and see what the match or mismatch is. To me, if you do nothing beyond sitting here for lunch today, if you can write down your vision, your top priorities, and you work on matching your time, there's a bunch of other things we're going to talk about, but that I've seen, that alone can make somebody who's good a lot better immediately. As simple as it is. All right. Okay, now, once, by the way, my definition of leadership, just for what it's worth, given I asked if you wanted, I talked about leadership, I teach leadership. My definition of leadership for purposes of this speech and this book and everything I do, all leadership is to me is working on deciding what you believe, which a lot of times is not an easy thing to do. Sometimes you're just not sure. You don't have a strong point of view. Getting conviction, making the effort to get conviction on what you believe, and then having the courage to act on it. That's leadership. And by that definition, you don't need to manage anybody to be a leader. You could be a single head of household. You could be a double head of household. You could be in the service. You could be a policeman or woman. You could be a project manager or professional working at Google. There are many leaders in this room. There's millions of leaders in this country. People ask where all the leaders are. There's lots of them. Here's the problem. Just because you manage thousands of people, which I did in my career, also does not mean you're a leader. Because you can manage thousands of people and not make the effort to truly decide what you believe or have the courage to act on it. So there are people that are in positions of power that are not acting like leaders, and there's many people who have no position of power but do exert leadership. And so everything that I talk about today is how do you do it. And I would argue a great company is one where the leaders do this, but they create an environment in the whole organization where people are not afraid to speak up and act like leaders. Express themselves, decide what they believe, and act on it. And I know I believe, as an outsider, that strikes me as one of the critical success factors to Google and why this company has done so well. All right. All these things are intended to make you more effective at that. So vision, priorities, how you're spending your time. Okay, now once you've got those three, now you're ready to coach people and you're ready to get coaching. Okay? How many of you have a coach? How many of you are a coach? All right. All right, so let me just comment on this. First of all, to me, coaching, when I say coaching, I'm just talking about people you work with. Do you identify one or two skill-related things that they need to do better and confront them with it and discuss it with them and then hopefully give them one or two ways to improve? That, to me, is coaching. A lot of people interchange coaching and mentoring. They're not the same to me. Mentoring is I tell someone a story or they tell me a story and I give them advice based on the story. But I probably don't observe them. Feedback, real coaching requires observation. Because in order to know what skills you need to improve on, I got to watch you. Or I need to interview about 10 people who do watch you. Okay? And so most people are not great coaches because of this. Or don't do a great job coaching peers on a project team because they don't do this. Takes a lot of preparation, and the year-end review is not the time to coach. How many of you have a year-end review? How many of you give a year-end review? Wow. Okay. How many of you wait to the year-end review to give coaching? Okay, now everybody's afraid to raise their hand, of course. All right, so let me comment why. The year-end review, in my opinion, that's the verdict. The jury has come in. And the reason I say it's the verdict, it's too late to do anything to affect your compensation or promotion. People are not really in the mood. Think about yourself. Are you really in the mood to get coaching in your year-end review? Especially if you think there's nothing you can do about it to affect your promotion or your comp. And so what I say is people should work on coaching during the year, at least 3 to 6 months in advance of the year-end review. All right? Now, more importantly for this group, I would argue it's 100% your job to coach people who report to you, but I would argue for people that report to you, or for all of you, it is 100% your job to get coaching. 100% your job. And most groups I go into, when I ask who has a coach, it's this, how many raise their hand who says they have a coach? Okay, it's a shockingly low number of hands, especially given, I would argue, as in a leadership-oriented organization, coaching is about as important a thing as you could possibly do. Why? Because you've got vision, priorities, how you spend your time, and then the whole thing, reason you coach is to try to get align people and the organization with what you're trying to do. I would say to all of you, if you don't have a coach, go get one here. And the way to go get one, unfortunately, is to ask people to give you advice on what they think there are one or two things you need to improve on. You actually need to go ask. People will not volunteer it. Why? Because they would prefer not to offend you. Or they don't know if you even want to hear it. They may think you may send off a vibe, even though you want coaching, that it's unwelcome to give you advice. And I would argue you've got to ask. Okay? And I think if you ask people for advice, A, they may be flattered, and B, they may need to go do some homework for 2 or 3 weeks before they can give you something sensible. But I would argue you should take ownership. I'd urge you to take ownership of getting coaching. How many of you are up for that? All right. So then, can I ask a dumb question? What's stopping you from doing it other than no one suggested it? What stops you? Anyone volunteer? What stops you from going and getting it? Yeah. Right. It's an awkward conversation. All right, I agree with that. So here's my advice on how to do this. And you got to get in the habit of doing it. And sometimes you have to train people and let them know you want coaching. First, you have to do it one-on-one. You can't do it in a group. In other words, you can't ask somebody to give you advice in front of other people, because what they're really thinking they may not want to say in front of other people. Appropriate. Number two, you need to be clear with them that you're sincere and that you want the advice. And then you need to make sure to thank them for what they do. My experience is when I started doing that in my career, had to get people going to give me advice. And they knew because I wanted, they would watch me a little more carefully. And often they would come in and warn me, without me asking, about some area I screwed up in, which used to happen frequently. Now, as you get more senior, I urge people to go get junior coaches. So you work at Google now?
Yes, I could not be there.
Okay, good. Teak Fellowship, sorry, I'm the chairman of the board. Anyhow, that's another story. But nonprofit effort we have in New York City. Okay, so you have to train people to do this, but it will make you dramatically more effective. And I would argue for the rest of your career, no matter how senior you get, you've got to get in the habit of asking either senior people for coaching, but as you get more senior, you've got to ask your subordinates for coaching. Let me ask one last question. How many of you people that are senior to you ask you for advice and coaching? Okay, good. And by the way, for those who got asked, what do you think of them? Think they're weaklings, or what's your reaction? How does it make you feel about them?
I like them that much better.
You like them that much better. And that's typical, by the way. It also, it makes them better. So my point is, if you want to be a leader, leadership is about getting advice. Now, people don't always think that, or that's not the first thing that comes to mind when I talk about leader, but the great leaders, I can tell you, seek advice. And then they listen to the advice, and they're open to learning and acting on it. And I argue, if you want to be a leader, you've got to do that. Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts in terms of whether that's written or one-on-one?
So the question is, written or one-on-one? Listen, if it's easier for somebody to give you advice well into the year in handwriting, fine. So that maybe it's safer. If they can do it in person, I'll tell you why it's great in person, because you're going to have 2 or 3 follow-up questions. So, gee, Rob, you need to get better at blank, or I don't like the way you gave that speech. Okay, I'd say, well, should I have done this? Should I have done that? You always have follow-up questions, and it's a conversation. Tell me how I would do it, and then I try it. But I would urge you to do this, and if senior people are asking you for advice, smart. That's a sign, I would argue, of an outstanding leader. All right, now, you guys don't need to worry about this, do you? Okay, so I'm going to skip this for today, but let me comment on the people that are much more senior in this company, a few that I know. This is, who do I ask for advice if I'm a senior person? I ask for people who are up and coming. And the truth is, every company has a succession plan. I am certain this one does. But only advice I give to senior people is use it. Now, you will get to a stage in your career in the not too distant future where you need to start thinking that everything you do, who's going to take your place. Some of you are probably already doing that. I was trained in my career. It's something I started doing it after 2 or 3 years at the firm. And it's a great discipline to have because it caused me to be a better coach. All right, let me go another thing. How many of you think you're a bottleneck? How many of you know what a bottleneck is? Other than this picture I pulled off the web, which I kind of like actually. But here's what a bottleneck is. Bottleneck is sort of things are flowing smoothly. You guys know all about bottlenecks. And some, because of your style, you slow things down. Now, sometimes it's quite appropriate to be a bottleneck. Check with me before you make a certain level of decision. I think sometimes if it's important enough, perfect. You delegate to people and you say, check back with me before you do blank. The problem is there are 2 or 3 other types of bottlenecks. And by the way, I've never met anybody who is a bottleneck who thinks they're a bottleneck. No one thinks they're a bottleneck because your input is so valuable. It just has to make things better. We just know that. Okay, so here's an example. One, you don't articulate a vision with priorities. And the people on your team are not clear for the project or the department or the unit. They're not clear on what the vision and priorities are. I would say if you have not done that, I assure you, you are a bottleneck. And what do I mean? Bottleneck impedes others from figuring out what they believe and acting on it. Impedes others from being leaders. And if you're freezing people and they're waiting around and they don't know what to do because you're not clear on the vision and priorities for a project, it slows everybody down or it sort of makes them wait and for you to explain what you want done next. And so that's one kind of bottleneck. Other kind of bottleneck is you do that and you delegate to people and then you second guess after they make the decision. And you so terrorize them that they think they're never going to make another decision again unless they check with you first. Another one is you delegate to them and agree that so-and-so is going to do something, but then you get involved and do it anyhow. Okay? You ever see that one around here? Okay. And all those things slow things down. The only thing I say to leaders, are you a bottleneck? And I think, by the way, the most important one is over-communicating your vision and priorities so everybody's clear on what they're supposed to do, and being a coach. By the way, there are a lot of people that are bottlenecks because they don't know what their peers or people they're working with think of them. But they get a bad vibe that they don't think too highly, and they're afraid to act because of it. You ever see that? This is why I would far prefer being blunt and direct and giving feedback, and then people know if you've got something to say, you're saying it, as opposed to talking behind their back or thinking something that you're going to write in their year-end review that they don't know about. Okay? If that makes sense. You know, a lot of people think being a leader is about, and it is about collaboration and harmony, but sometimes it's also about having enough commitment to one another and to the company and to the organization to be confrontational sometimes and maybe even make a few waves. I'll talk about that in a minute. Coaching is a little risky in that way. All right. Now, these next 2 things are something you need to do, and I know this company does frequently. And I call it evaluation. Very simple. Do you look at what you're working on with a clean sheet of paper? Do you look at your career with a clean sheet of paper? Do you look at your project, your department, whatever you're doing with a clean sheet of paper? Given the world is constantly changing, you're learning, your team is changing, customers are changing, competitors are taking actions all the time. Successful enterprises like this one are constantly looking at, if we were starting from scratch, is this how we do it? This is a very difficult thing emotionally to do, especially if you get in the habit of doing things a certain way. And here's really what you're asking. Is the culture, the people we have here, the way we're organized, the way we pay, the way we promote, all that, the way you're approaching the project if you're a project manager, is it still consistent with achieving the vision? Or is it not? And what happens, history of business, and the reason that many successful businesses from 30 years ago and 50 years ago you've never even heard of, they go away, is because they don't continually do this, because this is hard. It's extremely hard. And the reason it's hard is it's very hard for people to get out of habits. And what leaders do in a constructive way is jar people and give them opportunities to say, let's look at this with a clean sheet of paper. Coaching, I would argue, does this. If you're getting coaching all the time and you're asking for what you need to do better, it's a way for you to jar yourself and say, let me look at what I'm doing with a clean sheet of paper. Maybe I'm not going about this the right way. And all I'm saying to you is ask the question. I don't know the answer, but I encourage you to ask the question, yes.
So there's an underlying theme in what you're saying about trust. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what is you.
That's true.
Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, the question is underlying a lot of this is trust, right? Correct? Particularly if you're speaking up, if you're asking for advice, if you're making a few waves. And I would argue that fundamentally for each of us and each of you, when you walk into this building, you fundamentally every day make a judgment. Do I feel comfortable here? Can I be myself? Do I trust the organization enough to speak up if I have something to say? Understand I got to use good judgment. If I'm talking, I got to pick my spots. But do I have enough trust in the organization? I would argue, even with that, how many of you have been in a meeting, by the way, where you're nodding to something someone, a senior person said, and you don't understand what they're talking about? Or worse, you do understand and you totally disagree. Any of you ever done that? I've done it. So the question is why? It's because there's, even if you do trust, there's a little bit of, I don't want to look stupid. So there's trust. You know, do I trust that I will be treated fairly? The other part is, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll look like an idiot. Maybe I'm not good enough. Gee, these people seem so smart. Maybe I'm not as smart as they are. So that's also an element of it. You have to be confident enough. To do what I'm saying, you have to be confident enough in yourself that you're going to kind of make the leap and realize, yeah, occasionally I'm going to be wrong. And when I'm wrong, I'll say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Does that make sense? But you're right. There's an emotional part of this that's hard for people to make the leap sometimes. And you want to work at a place that encourages you to make the leap. All right. Now, this is a big subject I talk about, which is being a role model. And the reason I talk about it is the fact of the matter is you can articulate a vision, priorities, you match your time with your priorities, you're a good coach, you get coaching, you do all the things I talked about. And unfortunately, for many people, including you, there's about 1% of the time or 0.5% of the time that you throw it all out the window and undermine all your efforts. And what is that for many people? It's when you're stressed out or when you're under enormous pressure. And the tricky part about this, and it's hard to coach people on this, is for each, if there's 100 people in this room, what stresses each of you out is different for each one of you. I can tell you what stresses me out, what freaks me out. By the way, for me, it was when people leave. At my job, when people leave, I would go nuts. And so everybody who worked with me knew I was going to go nuts. And I had to learn to calm myself down a little bit. But I used to have a joke with all the department heads that reported to me, and I used to say to them, All I'm asking is for you to know what your people are thinking before they think it. That's it. Because I want to keep this team together. I want to build this team. Now, the fact of the matter is, though, for all of you, there may be things that make you at your worst. And I'm not asking you to throw them out here, but I would encourage you to think of two situations. Think of when you're at your best. When did you shine? You were great. Okay? Write it down. Write that down when you get a chance. What were you doing? Okay? What were you doing? What kinds of tasks were you doing? What kind of environment were you in? The flip side of that is, when were you at your worst? Where you're embarrassed by what you did? Maybe you made a mistake and you acted like it wasn't you. Maybe you made a mistake and you quietly blamed somebody else. Maybe something went wrong and you just didn't know what to do and you're not happy with what you did. I would argue, as a leader, it happens to all of us. You've got to manage those periods. The first way of doing it, understand what stresses you out. You have to understand yourself. Most important person you manage ultimately, we talk about as a leader, is you. You've got to understand yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your passions when you're at your best. But in particular, if you're going to be a role model, when I say be a role model, it's not enough to be a role model 98% of the time or 99%. Where people really watch what you do as a role model is the 1% of the time when it's hard to be a role model. Maybe somebody you work with on your team made a mistake and you stood up and took responsibility with them and didn't blame them. That's not so easy. That takes some trust. That takes guts. But I'll tell you, if you've got people working with you, they say, whew, I'd like to work with him or her again. I mean, that was fabulous. It really matters, and leaders need to think about it. And I don't think it's too late or too early for each of you to think about that. What stresses you out? When have you done things that you were not pleased with at all? Why? And so when those situations come up, it helps to think about it. This is the same reason, by the way, I ask people to think about their values and particularly their boundaries ahead of time. Keep a little journal. Let me just finish one second and think about it. I will not lie, cheat, steal. Think about it. All of us get in situations where very persuasive, either a client or a boss or a peer tries to push us to do something that we regret. And what helps inoculate you from that is to think about it in advance, and when you see those situations, call time out, slow down, get advice, talk to others, elevate it. Okay? This is what I mean by being a role model. Yes?
So arguably there's some situations that you're just not good at. Your personality type doesn't match them. It doesn't seem like it's always a good idea to, it seems like sometimes the answer is to get out of the situation. Or
Well,
is that not?
Here's the context that I'm talking about. So yes, if a job is not a good fit for you, fine. But you see, as you're in a leader, you don't have the option to, as they used to say, beam me up, beam up. You have to manage through it. All of us as leaders are involved in situations where this isn't a great fit for us. The trick is not how to get out of it. The trick is how to manage through it. Because eventually, you won't be able to extricate yourself from it. You actually have to manage through it. Now, sometimes that means by building a team with complementary skills, but in particular, this is really a character issue for me more than a skill issue. So I know there are going to be things I'm not good at. I already know that. I'm going to screw up. Can I admit that I made a mistake? That's what I'm talking about. Can I admit I don't know. I'm not good at this. Can I admit it? Can I say it? You think of senior people that you work with that do that. What do you think of them? I think your first reaction is, wow, this person's really good. Or they must be, I think it's impressive. It's not, whereas we tend to think when we admit these things, I'm going to look like a weakling, or I'm going to look like I'm not very good. And what I'm trying to say to people is, our conventional stereotypes of leaders, I don't think they're right. I think the truth is, that's where the whole premise of this book. When I say it's more important to ask the right question, I don't think that's our stereotype of leaders. who are, giving orders, or a president of the United States saying, I'm the decider. Yeah, sometimes that's true, but you've got to be willing to admit what you don't know, build your team accordingly, understand your strengths and weaknesses, get advice, and I think you're going to be dramatically more effective. Are you being yourself? Those little, Alana was showing me the red dots and the green and about the food. I mean, so you've got to watch what you're eating, know the calories. That's all saying, I want you to feel like this is your company, that we care about you, that you can be yourself. The problem is, no matter how much the company does, some of it's got to come from you. And this gets back to the trust issue. And the one that I'm most interested in is these last two. Are you willing to confront, speak up, disagree? And I'm not a troublemaker, but there are times where if you just think your boss or the company or your peers are about to make a terrible mistake, are you willing to say, I don't think I understand what we're doing, I don't think I agree. Understanding you may be wrong, they may even beat your brains in and make you feel dumb, but you occasionally got to do this, I would argue, as a leader. This is the essence of leadership. And there are some people that are so politically correct that it just, they think it's rude, or, there's lots of reasons to talk yourself out of this. But my experience is you're going to be much more likely to reach your potential if you're yourself. And by the way, I am certain this company and companies generally will do dramatically better if the bigger the group of people that feel comfortable being themselves so they can assert themselves, you're going to have a far more successful enterprise. So let me stop there. That's really all this book's about. And all I'm suggesting, there's a lot more obviously in the book than this, but this is the thumbnail. Keep 5 or 6 questions on your wall. If you don't like these ones, pick 2 or 3 others. But I think you've got to, when you're in trouble, which I get a raft of people coming to my office or phone calls at Morgan Hall when they're struggling at all levels, former students all the way up to CEOs of companies, governors, public officials, all with the same point, I'm having a problem. And usually what I do is go through a series of questions with them. All I'm saying, have 4 or 5 questions on your wall that you're thinking about and when things aren't going well. Now you may think, but I hope I don't get in a situation where things aren't going well. Well, that isn't going to happen. You're going to. All of us do. And all I'm trying to do is help you with a roadmap for how to navigate through it and be more effective leaders yourself and make your organization more effective. All right, let's go through questions now. Oh, come on. All right, yes.
What was the most difficult piece of feedback that you ever received?
Oh, God. Well, some things feedback you get is just heartbreaking. As you, the difficult one when I was a junior person, I used to have occasionally a senior person say, you'll get your chance, just tone it down a little bit here, because I'd be disagreeing. That was okay. That wasn't so bad. What happens, everybody thinks as you get more senior, you just get more confident and like there's nothing and it's the opposite. As you get more senior, the senior people here, and all of us seem so confident, feel more vulnerable. You're more on a tightrope. There's no net below. You got thousands of people. I fear I'm going to screw it up. And so what happens is I used to sit down with junior people and say, is there one thing I need to do, I can do better? I used to train people to do that. And they're very reluctant when you're a senior person to give you that advice, unless they're suicidal, because they think you're going to be offended. And so you would just pull it out of them, beads of sweat on their forehead. They think, oh, how do I get out of here, this guy? And they'd give you something. And they'd talk to you about a speech you gave that wasn't very good or something you did. And it's just like, oh, it's devastating. Oh, my God, it's terrible. So then after they leave, you try not to act too upset. After they leave, you call loved one, friend, and you ask them, am I like this? And, silence on the other end of the line, and they'll say, yeah, that does sound like you. And I think, oh, God, oh. So then you got to go work on it. And the reason it's so devastating, you realize not only does this person think it, everybody thinks it, and I'm so embarrassed. I'm mortified. Oh, my God. And you learn, though, by the way, can you write down on a piece of paper your strengths and weaknesses? And for most of us, takes a lot of thought. I could go to everyone around you in your job and say, write down that person's strengths and weaknesses, boom, 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 boom. 15 seconds. And the truth is, the fact is, the last person to know at your level and as you get through the rest of your career is often you. And the trick for you is to break through that. People ask about this, what's the biggest enemy a leader faces or any of you face? Isolation. Isolation. And you don't even know you're isolated. You know, people are thinking things, you're not aware, and you don't know to ask for advice. You're very stoic. You're afraid to disclose things about yourself, maybe, which makes people feel less inclined to give you advice. And you get isolated, and that's when you lose perspective. And so a lot of these questions are intended to punch through that and get you back connected to people. Others. Yes.
You asked what keeps us from finding a coach.
Yes.
And I thought about not knowing who I thought a good coach would be. How do you recommend choosing someone to
Well, here's my, first of all, in a job, my argument, I have lots of coaches. And I would say anybody who you think has observed you sufficiently to ideally have some constructive observations on what you could do better, they're a candidate to be a coach, okay? Then you just have to have the nerve to go ask them and say, would you mind talking to me for 15 minutes or 30 minutes? I'd love to get your advice or observations on what I could do better. That's it. But to me, observation is the key. You want somebody who's seen you enough to observe you. I don't care whether they're senior, junior, peer. And I think people will respond very well to that. And if you have 6 or 7 or 8 of those people, listen, over the years I've had, at this stage of my life, hundreds. You know, I'm finding people all the time. I walk out of class and say, I'd pull some poor person who was straggling behind and say, I want to get your opinion on what I did. Did that make sense? And anything you'd do differently? And, you know, but I'm asking people for advice all the time. Yes? Okay. So the question is, what about getting a coach who doesn't know you? So here's the issue. There are folks who don't know me where they can give me maybe some useful advice on some things. For example, I could go through with them, let me tell you my vision and priorities, is that clear to you? They could answer that. Here's the concern, so they're helpful, but on things that you can explain to them that they can give you feedback. In addition, though, I don't think that's enough. I think in addition, I work with lots of people and I've worked with lots of CEOs who say to me, oh, Rob, I don't need a coach. I got 3 outside mentors who I've known for years, 2 work at McKinsey, and you know, I tell them what's going on, they give me feedback. Well, as they're saying it, they don't give them feedback on the thing they really need feedback on, which is the way they're acting every day, their leadership style, that they offend people that they don't know. They don't know it. You'd have to watch them. You'd never dream. I would have never dreamed from just knowing this person in meetings that they act that way in their jobs. I wouldn't have believed it. You know? You ever see people like that? And so, in addition to that outside person, you need somebody who observes you, I believe. Yes. Yeah, sure, right there.
What's the criteria for choosing what tasks you should do yourself versus delegating to a team? There's one piece of context. In a lot of groups, our team operates very much as a startup.
Yeah.
Do business side of Google. We often are asked to do a lot more outside of our core job, which is great and fun. But in that context, what would be your criteria for
All right.
doing versus delegating?
So the question is, what tasks do you choose to do yourself? What tasks do you have other people to do? So this is a project team in this case? All right. So here's a couple of questions I always ask. If we're just divvying up tasks, 2 things I decide. If I'm running a very large team where I have to review everybody's work, then I try to only pick tasks where I absolutely have to do them. Okay? Because I realize I need to have time to review everybody's work. If, on the other hand, you're all equal and working on a team, each think of your strengths and weaknesses and what you'd enjoy doing or what would be good for you to do, number one. The thing that I'm trying to, point out So there's a project task, and some of when you're on a team, I would argue what I used to do and still do when I'm on a team, I'll do whatever needs to be done that helps the team. I will, because I feel that's what it means to be a teammate. Okay, now there's one level above. So that's probably the right approach and mindset at this level. When you get to, let's say you're getting someday where you're managing 5 project teams, then you've got to be much more, here's the problem. People have struggled from being a team participant to being team leader to being multiple team leaders. And what they have to stop doing is a lot of those tasks that they're so great at when they were on a team, unfortunately have to let those things go, because if they do those as well as do the team oversight, they can't do both. Or they'll squeeze out people on the team. Or if they organize multiple teams, they won't do a good job at that. Their priorities must change. And that overseeing the team might be more important than doing any one task. Does that make sense? So if you're a member of a 6-person team right now, I'd say do whatever needs to be done that helps the team. Simple as that. It's that next step that I think gets trickier. Does that make sense? Your team leader. Okay. All right. So let me answer that. So back to that question I asked, how many of you are a coach? I would argue if you're a team leader, all of a sudden, if you're a team member, you don't need to necessarily be a coach. Once you're the team leader, got to be a coach. So it means when you're allocating your time, one of your top 3 or 4 priorities is communicating vision, communicating priorities, and coaching. Okay? Make sure whatever you're doing, you leave time for those 3. That may mean doing any one task you don't have time for because you figure out in advance, I won't have time to do these other things. Okay? All right, others. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about, as you progressed through your career, kind of what measures did you take to expand your own capacity? And how did the questions that you started to ask yourself change, other than the fundamentals of one staying intact?
Well, so there's 2 things I used to do. 2 questions I used to ask myself. A, always, sometimes painfully, what are my strengths and weaknesses? Okay? And what is my passion? Hard question to ask, that second one. Because things that were a passion when I was 27, I found at 31, I've done it. This is not a passion anymore, but boy, I'd love to do blank. So those are the 2 questions there. And then there's a third question I'm always asking, including today. Am I learning? Am I learning? Am I learning? And if the answer starts to be no, that's when I think you start running out of gas. Or worse, it's the opposite is bad. If I ever get to the point where I don't think I have anything more to learn, then I really know I'm in trouble. Okay, because you always do. And so those are the 3 questions I'd suggest. Others, yes.
So what do you do when you get a feedback and it is wrong?
So you disagree with it? Sometimes I think it's wrong. So here's the tricky part now. So we're right now today talking about how to be a good coachee, if there's, I don't know if that's a word, but first of all, you got to make sure, first question, am I open to hearing things I don't want to hear? So you're trying to encourage people to tell you things you don't want to hear, who care enough about you to do it, and then you got to be open to it. And then second, given if I think, yeah, I am open, I just think that's wrong, fine. Some of the things you hear as coaching are going to be wrong, but that shouldn't stop you from going and asking for it. So I would then get 5 other opinions and check it out. You know what I mean? The biggest problem I see with people is not that they're not able to improve. The biggest problem I see when people don't improve is because they don't know what they need to improve on. They're not open to thinking about what they need to improve on, and they're not going out and finding out. It's awareness. It's not ability. This is my experience and my belief. 99% of the time, if people know what they need to improve on, they're going to figure out a way to do it. God only knows how, but they'll figure out a way. I've seen it. It amazes me. So why don't they improve? Because they don't know. They don't have 2 or 3 things that they know they need to work on. So the trick is If you think that one feedback is wrong, fine. Find the 2 or 3 things that are right that you need to work on and go after those. Okay? Go ahead.
Like, but like, how do you communicate that to the person? Because he will see you are not doing.
Is this your boss?
No.
If it's not your boss, you don't need to communicate that they're wrong. And in fact, I might suggest don't do that because they're going to feel like you're not willing to listen. If it's your boss, you might have to communicate that. If people give me advice, sometimes I don't always agree. I say thank you because they may come back and give you advice on something else later that you do think is right. And so you don't want to shut them off. Now, if you're a senior person, you really need to say thank you because what I want is people to tell 5 of their friends he or she is willing to receive advice. If you got something to say, go in there. He likes it. So I want to train people and create a culture where people are not afraid. Okay, yes. Yes.
Okay, so 2 questions. One, how do you be open and very authentic with others while at the same time not coming across as too mushy or not mushy, not the right word, without people kind of not taking you seriously, I guess?
Right.
And then also, the other question is, how do you solicit feedback without being perceived as just doing it for lip service?
All right, so let's take the second one first, then I'll go to the first, which is a profound question, the first one, because we talk about this all the time. So how do you ask for feedback? If you're sincere, I think it'll come through, okay? So as long as you're doing it for the right reasons, if someone's cynical and thinks you're just doing it to, whatever, kiss up to them, you can't do anything about that. I think if you're sincere, you'll be perceived as sincere. Now, the bigger question is, how authentic can I be? We talk about, I teach a class called The Authentic Leader in the fall. I just got done this week teaching. And this is the big enchilada, as they say, in that you need to disclose enough about yourself so that you feel comfortable. And if you're a leader, I would argue you have to disclose enough about yourself to encourage others to feel comfortable with you and to know you. We're always making a judgment about where to draw that line. There's certain things about me I could tell you that would make you laugh, would make you understand me better a little bit, but you don't need to know those. There's other fundamental things about me that I really should tell you if you're working with me because you'll understand me better. The trick is find out which ones those are. And the problem that some people get them all mixed up. They disclose all sorts of personal information, doesn't help anybody understand anything about where they're coming from, and they don't disclose the most important things. So you just have to use your judgment. And what makes you feel comfortable, I would argue, also is important. Okay? I'm sensitive to the time. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Enjoyed talking with you. Thanks for coming.